The year 2020 will be remembered for a number of reasons, primarily the coronavirus pandemic. Then there's also record unemployment, which led to a financial downturn across the world. And in light of all of this, a spike in the sales of electric vehicles also took place in 2020. Electric vehicles and advanced technology seemed as though they are confined to the 21st century, but it's a possibility that your great-grandparents drove one before you did. Momentum was being gained in the 1900s as the electric car surpassed its steam counterparts, but as the rise came, so did the fall. In 1908, when automobile manufacturing giant Ford released their gasoline-powered cars in the United States, the market was flooded with widely available and more affordable cars. We fast forward to the late 90s, when environmental concerns were being raised and governments worldwide were trying to find a greener alternative to save the dying planet after decades of being dependent on fossil fuel.
The science is clear and compelling. We humans are changing the global climate. The environment has moved to the top of the international agenda because how well a nation honors it will have an impact for good or ill, not only on the people of that nation, but all across the globe.
Some reports say the turning point was in Japan with the Toyota Prius in 1997, as a hybrid that used both fossil fuel and electricity.
There's a change happening. It begins with Prius, Toyota's revolutionary hybrid vehicle, and continues with more vehicles rated most fuel efficient in their class.
Others credit the change to the Tesla Corporation in 2006.
I think global warming is a very serious issue, and it's something that we have to address, and the only way to address that is to come up with a car that doesn't add carbon emissions to the environment, and I think the way to do that is with electric vehicles.
Whoa. Now, let's bring it back home to Jamaica.
Jamaica is not sitting by idly. We are strategically addressing our inherent vulnerabilities with the appropriate focus on building resilience while honoring our moral obligation to reduce our emissions.
In November 2022, Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Senator Matthew Samuda, said the island is looking at sustainable waste management in addition to having at least 50% of energy needs from renewables. This is huge. Now, a part of this grand endeavor to create a cleaner and greener planet is meeting grounds where like-minded people can discuss more eco-friendly options. One of those arenas is the Caribbean Sustainable Energy Forum. PBCJ was invited to the 8th installment held in November 2023 and will be featuring aspects of it throughout the program. A thrust is being made to propel Jamaica towards a more sustainable future that doesn't involve putting the planet at risk. A key component of that plan is electric vehicles.
Today is a great day for Jamaica. Today we plug into a dynamic and revolutionary industry, charting our way to electric vehicle readiness for a new Jamaica.
We know that this is the direction that Jamaica is going in, and that while adoption might be slow, we wanted to make sure that there was a place for EV users in Jamaica. We also wanted to make sure that we got ahead of the curve as far as spending time getting to know what the EV market was like, the cars that are available on the market, and understanding the process of claims and everything that it takes to support the EVs as they become a regular part of the Jamaican landscape.
The International Energy Agency, IEA, which is the body that assesses the global energy sector, projects that globally, the number of battery-powered and hybrid vehicles could increase from 10 million in 2020 to nearly 140 million by 2030.
There is a recognition that the transport sector is a significant part of the energy demand, which is largely supplied by fossil fuels. And the countries, well, the region as a whole has committed to energy transition for energy security reasons, but also for climate. In other words, to fulfill the countries have made commitments to fulfill their climate objectives. So in order for the countries to achieve a significant shift, it means that the transition also has to happen in the transport sector. You know, shift away from gasoline, if you may, and diesel fuel as the main sources for transportation. But what I can say, I think we expect to see a significant shift just based on what has happened over the last 2 to 3 years, actually, in terms of strong government actions, in terms of their own public sector fleets. And I think once the public sector leads the way, once you have the necessary policy framework in place, which the countries are working on assiduously, and which Caribbean Development Bank is seeking to support these countries on. Once you have that, then I think other things will happen apace, apace. And so I expect to see significant shift.
Although the government is moving forward with a significant push, Jamaicans are still hesitant towards a change.
I think the challenge a lot of people have had so far is that electric mobility is so new, there's not a lot of expertise domestically here in the Caribbean. And so, there isn't a guiding set of local knowledge necessarily outside of, a few of us in the industry that have been working both here and abroad that we can bring into it. But, CCRE and CARICOM have put a lot of work and time and effort and energy in creating the regional electric vehicle strategy, the REVs, and that really can form a guiding document to help first identify the different areas where policy and regulation are needed, and then to bring in some of those best practices, not only internationally, but for some of the markets domestically, like Barbados, Jamaica, Bahamas, that have already been successful, and use some of those lessons learned to make the job a lot easier for everybody else who perhaps isn't quite as far along in the journey.
In 2023, a report by J.D. Powell, which is a US-based analytic data company focused on consumer needs and interactions, looked at the first quarter of the year and noted that just over 20% of electric vehicle EV drivers experience hardware malfunction. Precautions can, however, be taken through the installation and procurement process to properly weigh the pros and cons of purchasing an electric vehicle for yourself.
And so as long as you're working with a quality charger that's installed properly, you don't have to worry about the type of power that's actually going into the vehicle.
Ideally, you don't deplete it below 20%. With a lithium battery, you kind of set a minimum state of charge, and you try not to deplete it below that to prolong the life of the battery.
From a crash test perspective, these vehicles are tested just like any other one would be. One of the great things about EVs, because there's not an engine or a transmission up front, you don't have this giant weight in front of the passenger compartment. So for front end crashes especially, EVs are extremely safe. The second part about EVs that are extremely safe is that they have a low center of gravity. That low center of gravity means they're much less likely to roll over in a high-speed maneuver or an accident. So again, that provides additional safety for the passengers. In addition, the battery chemistries are typically internationally tested for crash testing, for puncture testing, depending on the manufacturer, different ratings. So, obviously the consumer needs to understand what product they're buying into. Once Flash Motors we bring into, we are very heavily invested in the CATL ecosystem, which is the world's largest EV battery manufacturer and one of the safest that are out there. And so that provides people with great crash test rating as well as great, what I would call accident protection rating as well.
As we move forward, governmental infrastructure and policies play a significant role in this implementation.
So prices for electric vehicles have tended to be relatively high when compared to your internal combustion engine vehicle. But governments are starting to get behind to ensure that pricing is aligned. So when it comes to electric vehicles in Jamaica anyway, the duty structure has been reduced to a 10% duty on the import of electric vehicles. That makes it much more competitive to your internal combustion engine vehicles that range from 30% all the way up to 200% depending on the engine size. And so over time, what I think you'll see is battery electric vehicles becoming much more competitive in the marketplace. Battery prices are dropping monthly, right? And so, that is the most expensive component that goes into an EV. As we move through time, you'll see price positioning get a lot better.
It is also the onus of the government to observe the global market and implement strategies from their findings. In the National Electric Vehicle Policy Report released in 2023 for the island, we see possible incentives to bolster the desire for EVs, and this was deduced from other nations, including European countries. Incentives have already played a significant role in the uptick of EVs on the island, and even more is being done to change the tide.
The Ministry of Finance last year implemented a duty reduction for the importation of EVs, which has been transformative for the market. So before in Jamaica, depending on the size of your engine, you paid different duty imports. With electric vehicles for the next 3 years, starting last year, you paid a flat 10% and no GCT.
As much as these plans for a greener future is a commendable goal, it could be unattainable for the region without aid.
The region needs all the support of our partners, regionally, internationally, because the change really requires resources and resources at different levels. So there's need for significant concessional grant type resources to help to build capacity, build awareness, help to put the appropriate framework in place. And those largely will, those resources will largely have to be grant type resources.
One of the great things about electric mobility is that there are a lot of great lessons that are already out there from the world, whether we're talking about Europe, China, Oceania, North America. A lot of problems and sort of like need for regulation and standards have already been solved. Really and truly is for us to understand them first and foremost, and then apply them to our region specifically.
There is the planning, because we're transitioning, so we're going to have more of the renewable energy coming in. And so you have what is called an integrated resource and resilience plan that we do to help our utilities and our countries understand how you can move from your traditional sources of energy to the more renewable sources of energy. And so building capacity there to make sure that the persons on the ground in country are able to first understand the process and eventually be able to do that sort of planning for themselves. So that's one tier.
Now, we focus quite a bit on the larger picture for nations and the environment, but now it comes down to the individual. Why should you purchase an electric vehicle? How does it benefit you directly? Well, for starters, it saves you money over time.
So our bikes allow saving in overhead costs for gas, in maintenance. So these factors definitely contribute to individuals persuading them to buy these units.
It's a great experience. It improves your understanding of your civic duty.
We believe in this decarbonization effort so much that we put the chargers afford for the car. When we did our launch, we didn't have a full EV. We had a plug-in hybrid. Last time we had World EV Day, we had a number of EVs. If you talk to ATL, they'll tell you how many BYDs they're bringing in, how many Taycans they're bringing in. The EV market in Jamaica is growing exponentially. And with what the government is doing with the reduction in duty to 10%, more people are buying on it, and then people are seeing the saving, the cost saving on the fuel and the operational cost. More people are buying into that process. And then we'll make it even so more compelling. Everybody feels responsible for our environment.
It ensures that your children and their children have a healthy environment to live, work, and create a better life.
Electric mobility building. So what it is that we do as a project, we develop the ecosystem, or we support the development of the ecosystem, so to speak. So we've done public education. You can check us out on Instagram, Facebook, as well as our YouTube, where we tell persons about electric mobility, what it is, the different infrastructures available in Jamaica between JPS Charge and Go, as well as Evergo, in terms of the charging network, as well as just the different vehicles that are available. So we tell them about any new vehicles that are being brought in by the different dealers. We tell them about all of just every single thing that is happening in Jamaica with electric vehicles. That's what we try to promote on our page, let persons know that we have the infrastructure and it's gradually developing.
The concern of renewable energy and a greener planet is far from a simple matter, but it's not as complex and daunting as it seems from the outside.
Personally, I don't think so. I mean, my background is engineering, so I have a proclivity towards complication, but I think one of the great things about electric mobility is that there are a lot of great lessons that are already out there from the world, whether we're talking about Europe, China, Oceania, North America. A lot of problems and sort of like need for regulation and standards have already been solved. Really and truly is for us to understand them first and foremost, and then apply them to our region specifically.
Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct? In 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies.
Electric vehicles aren't the overall solution to a more eco-friendly environment. They can be an unrealistic expense for some.
The upfront cost is higher on an electric vehicle because they're, first of all, newer, and new things normally cost more, but also because it's high tech.
The variety of models that are available for EVs are still growing. So gasoline and diesel have been around for a very long time, and so there's a wide variety of models that are available at different price points. One of the things that we've taken seriously at Flash Motors is to continue to bring down a lower price point for new EVs, and we're working on that. When we brought in our first EV, I think it was around 9 million Jamaican dollars. We're now getting into the $6 million range. We'd like to be able to get down to the $4 and $3 million range. Once we're able to get to that point, I think I'd be able to change my answer to say yes there for everybody.
In addition, EVs still utilize fossil fuel in another scope. But this is being looked at as a stepping stone to move away from the hydrocarbon.
We like to call this an energy transition, right? So we're starting at a point where we're transitioning to something that we believe is going to be better. Again, because electricity is ubiquitous, it's available anywhere, and it can be produced in many number of ways. It doesn't mean that we need to solve the electricity problem to implement the electric vehicle problem. Ultimately, we know that Jamaica has the capability to produce its own electricity through renewables. And so by transitioning ourselves to electric vehicles, we can access that in a variety of ways. So even if today we cannot necessarily access domestically produced power, we have the capability over time to do that. So taking an opportunity to transition now with the vehicle set sets us up for success in the future.
As a change is being made by the government to facilitate this, such as duty allowances on EVs, it has been said that more can be done to push Jamaica in a more conducive direction for electric vehicles.
There's a lot of cohesion to be had between private sector and government. I think there's some opportunities there. In Jamaica in particular, the private sector has led a lot of the implementation. The sales of EVs have primarily gone to private sector. The installation of infrastructure has been done by the utility and the private sector as well. So I think there's a really good opportunity for the government to come in and join in on that. Particularly when it comes to regulations and standards. In Jamaica, we have a very unique problem where we are faced with mixed standards when it comes to charging infrastructure. And there's a very real opportunity for the government to step in and regulate that. And I say that because usually each country or each region will have selected one charging standard, which allows for efficiency. So I'm in a unique position where I'm both a supplier of electric vehicles, or the number one supplier for electric vehicles in Jamaica. I'm also the number one supplier of private charging stations in Jamaica. So I understand the nuances of both markets. And in understanding that, I have a lot of difficulty meshing the two because we have multiple vehicles with different standards, which means I have to supply multiple standards, which of course is economically inefficient. The government has a really good opportunity to step in, and we know through the REVs with CCRE and CARICOM, we're also trying to implement that across the region on harmonizing around a single standard, which will allow us to be much more efficient in supplying vehicles and infrastructure to the region.
In no way, shape, or form are you being forced to sell all your valuables and live off the grid in a cabin in the woods. Nor, as Jamaicans would say, are you being told to buy pussy in a bag. We've highlighted a problem, and one solution is currently being implemented. And it wouldn't hurt to see if the grass is really greener on the other side of the pastures. See what I did there? Greener, eco-friendly. Energy Month might be celebrated in November, but you can make greener choices any day of the year. I'm Raka Robinson. Thank you for joining me as we took a look at electric vehicles in Jamaica.